Hello, everybody. I'm George from Ireland. So, this is me carrying on looking at the Trump presidency that was. As he's made clear, he'd quite like to regain the White House. No one has done that since Grover Cleveland in 1893 with his running mate Stevenson. I don't think that Stevenson was his vice president the first time round. So, when Trump stood for the presidency in 2006, he was blessed in having a good enemy. There was so much focus on Trump's rambunctious style and his barnstorming vociferations that we sometimes might overlook how bad his opponent was, though she wasn't bad in the same way. So, Trump had a certain skill as the Cicerone of cynicism. He was fork-tongued, not that that put off other people. The Christian evangelicals, they might recall that the good book says lying lips are an abomination to the Lord. He savaged his opponents with stridency and hyperaggression and just plain rudeness. Impresses some people. They think that's tough, that he's shooting from the lip and so on, that he's unspun. Although, no, there is electoral calculation that went into this. He never told his audience something they didn't want to hear. He was always hitting below the belt, an absolute brute, and that was applauded by the sort of lynch mob element of the Republican base. I'm not saying that's all Republicans, but Hillary's debilities and vulnerabilities as a candidate should not be underestimated. She was so egregiously dishonest, but she's not quite on the ocean-going scale of Trump, because I'd forgotten just how bad the Clintons were, and then the Trump campaign came around and actually reminded me of all the scandals of the Clinton White House years. Hillary's advocated for many repellent policies. She's an indefatigable advocate of the oppression of Palestine, of its illegal military occupation. She has persistently defended the most horrific human rights abuses, the willful murder of civilians on a very large scale. I know that's sort of par for the course in American politics because they're all on the payroll of AIPAC. I mean, not personal money, but campaign finance. She's opined for any crime against humanity to be entirely acceptable so long as it's committed by Israelis. And I know there are other regimes which are much worse. Her unbridled devotion for abortion makes even pro-choice a squeamish, partial birth abortion, no limitation. Is there no end to her bloodlust? So her hypocrisy, cant triangulations, and woodenness put off middle America. She inspired a visceral revulsion, equaled only by the detestation many feel for Trump. So, had there been a more acceptable Democratic candidate, then the Democrats would have won more handily in the popular vote, and obviously, therefore, in the electoral vote. So, James Comey was director of the FBI, and he made the fateful decision to reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton's misuse of her personal email account for official emails when she was Secretary of State. If you're not familiar with the US political system, the Secretary of State is what other countries would call the foreign minister. So that was very damaging, particularly the timing of it. It was a critical juncture in the campaign. Had the timing come earlier and the investigation had been closed again, there would have been time for it to recover before polling day. Had it come closer to polling day, it would have been too late to have much of an effect because people would have made their minds up. But it came at the worst possible moment for her and obviously took the heat off Trump with his many scandals. The former senator from New York, she aggravated her predicament by deleting many emails, which really deepened her reputation for subterfuge. She's perceived as somebody being underhand. Her unctuous rhetoric has put off many people. So I remember when she wanted to be a New York senator in 2000, she changed her baseball allegiance to appeal to more people in an electorally calculated manner. That was so disingenuous. You think people aren't dim enough to fall for that, but maybe some of them are. I mean, you want to vote for this candidate or that, why would you care which sports team they support, even if it's not the same one as you? But evidently there are a few people who are like that, and that might be enough to swing an election, despite the Republicans fielding a fairly credible, energetic young candidate, Rick Lazio, against her in 2000. So Trump was utterly two-faced, but Hillary Clinton was little better. So this rambunctious Trump spoke in very plain vocabulary. His very lack of education redounded to his advantage. He seldom used words of more than two syllables, and his uses of opprobrious language was very appealing to xenophobes. He was warmly endorsed by the Ku Klux Klan, and that ought to be the kiss of death, but no, it was the kiss of life. So Trump's low reading age, as I said, was something which actually benefited him. His lexis consisted of these short and very commonly used words, and even the dimmest person could understand his verbiage, despite the sort of total dearth of coherence or cogency. Speaking ungrammatically, his frequent solecisms and malapropisms. He was adept with communicating with people certain emotions, what we like, what we dislike. Well, it's really love or hate. He always amplifies it up to the max. And his pretense of being a man of the people somehow worked. His very unsophistication worked well with simpletons. Now, incoherence and total Trumpian tripe didn't have any dissuasive effect on voters. Perhaps it made him more attractive to the mentally substandard. And obviously, dim people have got the same right to vote as anyone else. Their vote counts as much as for the cleverest people. And I'm not saying there were no smart people who voted for Trump. There were. And there's some people who really have benefited from him. Multimillionaires who got tax cuts. He's damaged the economy, but he's benefited a few sectors of it, and so on. The military-industrial complex, he's done what they wanted, and ultra-Zionists, he's done what they wanted, and I can't think who else. Polluters, yep, he's pleased them. I mean, gun nuts, he's not furthered their agenda. There's been no advancement of the pro-life cause, despite the pro-life judges he put on the Supreme Court. So the Democrats, despite their finest intentions, they failed to persuade half the working class that they're on the side of the average American. They hardly even mention the term working class. It's people, those struggling to get into the middle class. Why can't they say working class? So despite arguing for and implementing policies that benefit normal people on low and middle income, many voters don't grasp that the Democrats are actually making life better for most people. It was a communications disaster for the Democrats. There were these saponaceous speeches by Hillary Clinton that did a no good, speaking only in generalities, not really policy specifics. Loony left policies about safe spaces, white privilege, footballers taking a knee, alienated people who are of moderate opinion. So the Democrats, they weren't appealing to the middle of the road, they're actually putting them off, sort of speaking to themselves, and not on bread and butter issues. I can't remember who it was said the thing about Trump is he speaks very plainly. Rather than saying, I will improve the economy, he says, I will get you your job back. Even though he won't, and has actually kind of done the opposite. But nevertheless, it's something practical. It's not something theoretical or academic. And so that's why that connects to ordinary people. So Trump was always saying that there was so much fraud and the media was too sympathetic to Hillary. I haven't seen any objective data about that, but that might be true. Not about the electoral fraud bit. The press gave her a fairly tough time, but even if the media had been too kind to her, that's not rigging the election. Now, Donald Trump used to explode in a hissy fit when a female journalist asked him a worthwhile question. Meg Kelly of Trump's favourite channel, Fox News, even she put him on the spot, and he said she was riding the crimson wave, and there was blood coming out of her wherever. So he then claimed that wasn't an allusion to menstruation. What could it possibly be? But Bowdlerizing, talking about menstruation. He's threatened by intelligent women. He's got this pathological fear of confident women, and that was to resurface time and again. One of the few outgroups he hasn't vituperated against are gays. That's telling. I'm not sure why. So Fox News had an event that was due to be compared by La Kelly, and this terrified Trump. He refused to attend, saying he was going to go to an event and for military veterans and donate millions of dollars to them. In reality, he never donated an ob to them. Now, his running away from Megyn Kelly actually didn't harm his campaign. Ted Cruz rightly mocked Trump, saying, yeah, Megyn Kelly's really scary. So ordinary Republicans seem to perceive Trump as being frank and appreciating his candor. But he was very much spun. He tailored his speeches to suit his audiences. There were record deportations under the Obama administration, yet Trump whipped up fear and hatred towards Mexican immigrants in particular, and he didn't distinguish between legal and illegal immigrants, saying there were murderers and rapists that were bringing drugs. Now, of illegal immigrants, have some ever committed murder? All right, a few have. Have a few committed rape? I suppose a few have. Have a few brought in drugs? I mean, I suppose a few have. But American citizens do all these things as well. I'm not saying most do. When a Hispanic judge ruled against Trump, Trump said the guy did not seem like an American because of his name. So the judge was therefore prejudiced against Trump. Wow. So Trump thinks that Hispanic Americans do not count as U.S. citizens, unless, of course, they back him. How did he get away with this? This open appeal to nativism, to racial bigotry. But that played well, and there was scarcely a murmur of dissent in the Republican Party. So Trump's sister's a judge. He's often said the judicial system is totally unfair, but that hasn't stopped him filing many lawsuits. If it is unfair, never file a single one, because you're going to lose them all, aren't you? Anyway, if it was unfair to him, he wouldn't use it. Does he think his sister's unfair? He's not said. So projection is Trump's modus operandi. He will accuse others of his own worst vices, always turning it around, talking about lying James Comey and crooked Hillary. In fairness, Hillary really is crooked. So at Trump rallies, there were chants of lock her up, a reference to Hillary Clinton. And obviously, when he became president, he never did anything about that. And constantly going on about Benghazi, something that the Republicans voted to investigate 33 times, the deaths of, I think it was 5 Americans. That was several years ago, the US consulate in Benghazi, Libya, when there was some intelligence there might be an attack on it, but wasn't investigated. Well, they weren't evacuated in time, and several Americans were killed there. So anyway, there've been no charges as a result of Hillary because of this. That being a U.S. diplomat abroad is a little bit dangerous. Libya was the most dangerous post they could possibly accept, and that there is some risk of assassination. And if you don't accept that risk, you don't accept the job. So the U.S. has taken sides in an armed conflict. It was an exceedingly hazardous undertaking to go to Benghazi. So these valiant Americans, they laid down their lives serving their country. But should the diplomats have been evacuated on the strength of this warning? Perhaps. But you get a lot of warnings which lead nowhere, otherwise you simply wouldn't operate diplomatic missions. Was it feasible to evacuate them? I don't know. US diplomats have been killed abroad under Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, and others. No one said the president was culpable in that case, or, the Secretary of State, because that's what Hillary was. She was Secretary of State at the time of Benghazi. So at Trump rallies, he repeatedly urged fans to physically attack protesters, beat the shit out of them. They should be carried out on stretchers. Those were his exact words. Such assaults occurred. Despite knowing this, Trump persisted in inciting violent crime. Why was he never indicted for this? By contrast, Trump has advocated the police arresting people for entirely peaceful and lawful protest. He's defended the police committing absolutely unprovoked assaults on peaceful protesters because someone might have been an Antifa. Antifa's a lawful organization. Wow. And even if it's an illegal organization, you're not allowed to assault someone. You could arrest them, but not simply hit them. It's staggering that he would get away with this. And he knows he has this impunity. That's his multi-billionaire privilege. So during the campaign, the Access Hollywood tapes came to light. And that's when he was with about Billy Bush, a member of the Bush family, about 10 years earlier, boasting about his sexual prowess, about grab 'em by the pussy, hitting on married women. They just let you do it, and so on. And Billy Bush was laughing along. So would they drop him? I mean, there's pandemonium in the Republican Party when that came out. Despite protestations of abhorrence by Republicans, they almost all fell in line behind him. For the GOP, it was simple: win at all costs. They would tell any lie, exploit any group, break any principles, stoop to any low, betray anyone, renege on any vow, so long as you win. So this outright Machiavellianism is almost impressive. So Trump's egregious ill grace, coarseness, foul-mouthedness, repeated boasting about infidelities might have put off a few family values conservatives. And then the Donald stood on the stage at a Republican rally and boasted about the size of his membrum virile. Parents should bear in mind that the president is a role model for children. Millions of children will look at his behavior and think, I'm going to emulate that because I want to be president one day. Boorishness, hubris, willful ignorance, spite, vulgarity, avarice, gluttony. These are unideal traits for children to follow. And the president is his commander-in-chief of the military. No ordinary soldier, sailor, marine, airman, or whatever would be permitted to get away with such slothfulness, greed, indiscipline, untruthfulness, over racialism, emotional incontinence. And what signal does it send to troops that a man can be elevated to such a post when he behaves like that? He's supposed to be someone that even the lowliest military person can respect. His behaviour should be a standard to which others aspire, right? The dignity of the nation should be reflected back to them through the president. And Christian fundamentalists are very much ones to moralise. How do these moralisers extend this unique indulgence to Trump despite his total impenitence? He's an unrepentant adulterer, and he's become a standard bearer for these Puritans and prudes. It's flabbergasting. I'm just baffled by the hypocrisy. It's beyond anything I thought them capable of. I knew that they were capable of some double thing, but this really takes the biscuit. Anyway, until 2015, Trump didn't even pretend to be religious. He only showed up at churches for funerals and his 3 weddings. But in 2015, he got religion, and I think I can guess why. How curious that he should have found Jesus at precisely the moment it became electorally advantageous. Donald boasted, "No one knows more about the Bible than me," so he's a biblical scholar. But this theologian might have known about vanity of vanities. And Donald proved he doesn't know the first thing about the good book. He said 2 Corinthians, when any Christian knows it's called 2 Corinthians. Now, in fairness, Trump is similar to a biblical figure, Judas. He'll certainly do anything for 30 pieces of silver. His pretense at religiosity was one of the most unconvincing things about the whole implausible charade. His lack of contrition, his utter lack of humility, exposed him as a serial mortal sinner, and that would surely stick in the craw of any practicing Christian, wouldn't it? Anyway, so I vainly hoped in my naivete. To be fair to Trump, he does have a religion. He can't be accused of godlessness. He's a mammon worshipper, or perhaps a bitheist. He worships himself as well as filthy lucre. And a Christian should view that as the worst sort of ill religion. So his self-conceit was one of his many besetting sins. And yet he was treated with complete forgiveness despite his lack of penance. So anyway, to add some ballast to the Trump ticket, it was decided they'd got to bring on board Mike Pence. The governor of Indiana was Republican straight from central casting. He was bland, upright, reserved, a lockstep conservative, happily married with children, no, not a whisper about adultery. He was an evangelical Christian, so he had all the credentials you'd want him to have. He was very judgmental, and you might have assumed that he would feel morally compelled to speak out against Trump's numerous grotesqueries, vulgarities, and puerilities. But no, not a bit of it. He acquiesced in everything Trump did, or indeed it was an enabler. And never has a vice president been in such a vice-like grip of a president. So Trump's conduct is the sort of thing that Christian fundamentalists would say condemns people to the infernal regions. And at rallies, Trump continued to call upon Russia to hack into Hillary's emails. So, and obviously the Party of National Security and the military, they went along with this high treason. So embarrassing information of the Democratic National Committee was published. The Russians also hacked into the Republican National Committee, but they chose not to use that information blatantly because they wanted to boost the Republicans. And there was they wanted to do down the Democrats. The one world leader Trump would praise effusively was Putin. So when the people said, but Putin murdered journalists, Trump said, he is at least in charge of his country, which Obama is not in charge here. So murdering journalists is being in charge. That's admirable behaviour. That's what a president should do, to commit murder of journalists for telling the truth. Well, telling the truth is something Trump is seldom guilty of. And when he was in 2013, Trump was in Moscow for this Miss World contest that he was hosting. And it was at Crocus City Hall. So he stayed at the Radisson Hotel, where he was allegedly filmed cavorting with 2 prostitutes. Did he pay them to urinate on a bed that Obama had slept on, or to urinate on him? The one thing is hard to believe about that story is that he would pay them. He never pays a bean. The rest I can easily believe, but I can't believe he paid anybody. It's not confirmed that such a PP tape existed. So the Trump campaign was in touch with Russian intelligence officers for months. Donald Jr. met them at Trump Tower, sought damaging information on Hillary, and that's all proven by emails. So the Trumps wanted Trump to get rid of the Magnitsky Act in return. So when questioned about it, Donald Jr. said the meeting was about adoption. Now there's a grain of truth in that, because Putin had hit back for the Magnitsky Act, which is banning Russians on a list of Putin's enablers from putting money to the US. So Putin's riposte was to forbid Americans from adopting Russian children. The Russian children who are adopted abroad are often very disabled or seriously ill, which is why they don't get adopted in Russia. So Putin was condemning these children to stay in appalling conditions in orphanages, which he's grossly underfunded because he and his cronies have plundered the treasury and spent most of what's left on unnecessary armaments to fight wars of aggression and commit genocide in Syria. But Mr. Donald Trump liked to boast how he did so much business with Russia and how he and Putin felt such mutual admiration. Putin intervened for the only ever time in an American election, saying that Trump was a very smart person. In another speech, Trump said, "I don't know anything about Russia. I have absolutely nothing to do with Russia. I don't know Putin at all," despite having met him several times. He'd learnt long ago that the stout denial of easily verifiable facts is sufficient to hoodwink the purblind. It's the same thing that Putin does. So you can see why they're really brothers by another mother. So America first, it was more a case of Russia first in terms of Trump's priorities. Not for nothing was he known as the Kremlin candidate. And when it came to denouncing the Ku Klux Klan, Trump refused to do so. He'll be grossly insulting about all sorts of honourable Americans like John McCain. But when it comes to the vilest group in America, these racist terrorists, he wouldn't say a word against them. So white supremacists and Russian government are never criticised by Trump. Why? Because they both played a crucial role in his campaign. Peaceful protesters are excoriated as vile by him. But when it comes to racist terrorists, he won't say a word against them. And when Donald J. orated, it didn't consist of racist dog whistles. For the first time in decades, a candidate indulged in openly racialist screeds. Nativism was his stock in trade. He raved about the media being enemies of the people, and it was indicative of incipient totalitarianism. It's the sort of atavism that the United States has castigated in other countries. So being uncharitable to immigrants appeals to many Republicans. This didn't prevent Trump assisting his parents-in-law to become US citizens. His barbs against immigrants, being an economic boom, being an economic drain on the country, are disingenuous. Up to 20 women accused Trump of sex crimes, including rape. One of a sexual assault allegation had Trump saying, "Well, she's not my type." So if she had been your type, he would have done it. It's a tacit admission, and that's unmissable. The fact he was married wouldn't have stopped him. The fact that the sexual assault is wrong, that wouldn't have stopped him. His conduct around women was injudicious, to put it mildly. So he thought he would lose the 2016 election. He was getting his excuses in early, saying it's rigged, just like he said about the nomination being rigged, despite winning it. So to overwhelming international consternation, Trump won the Electoral College in 2016. He lost the popular vote by 2%. No president has lost the popular vote by so much and won the Electoral College. Just 80,000 votes in 3 key swing states is what decided it. Had it gone the other way, the 45th president would have been called Hillary. The third party had the strongest showing since 1996. They polled 6% between them. That signaled deep discontent with the two major parties. This fluke win in the Electoral College was not serendipitous enough for Trump. He had to lie. He claimed that he won the popular vote because over 3 million illegal immigrants voted for his opponent. I don't know of a single case of that ever being proven, a single illegal immigrant being proven to vote. Even if they did vote, we don't know they voted for Hillary. So Trump never stopped repeating that mistruth, and many people believe the Donald. So the incoming Trump administration refused to take meetings with the still governing Obama administration. They were offering Trump contingency plans in case another pandemic broke out. There have been several pandemics over the previous 13 years, and that was to prove significant. That's enough from me, so please follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Goodbye.